And what he did is he took unconsecrated hosts and he said, you open up your hand. He placed an unconsecrated host in our hand. And we all held it and we're looking at it. We're like, okay, cool. And he goes, this is the last time you will ever touch this with your hand. The second thing I want to tell you about is the Eucharist. And we've talked about the Eucharist a lot, but I want to tell you something that happened to me with the Eucharist once. And when I was 7 years old, I went to go to First Communion, just like every 7-year-old does, right? Now, I was 7 years old in 1970, okay? And so those of you that, well, nobody's here as old as me, but 1970, that's a critical date. And the reason that's a critical date is because it's just a few years after the end of the Vatican II conference. And Vatican II, they did a lot of things, and unfortunately what happened is some people took some of the things from Vatican II and decided to go their own way with it. And some things happened that probably shouldn't have happened, but they did. And so I remember going into the sacristy. The priest took all of us kids into the sacristy. I couldn't tell you what he looked like. I couldn't tell you his exact words except for one sentence that he said. And what he did is he took unconsecrated hosts and he said, open up your hand. He placed an unconsecrated host in our hand. And we all held it and we're looking at it. We're like, okay, cool. And he goes, this is the last time you will ever touch this with your hand. What? As a 7-year-old, I'm going, what are you talking about? Why? I mean, this really intrigued me. There was this sense of awe and wonder in what was about to happen with me receiving this. And so I had this initial sense of there's something really extraordinary about what I'm going to receive when I receive First Communion. And then, of course, everybody started receiving it in the hand, and 2 years later, all of that awe and wonder that I had about the Eucharist was gone. Now, I'm not saying necessarily that it's wrong to receive communion in the hand, but I would challenge you to go up and receive kneeling on the tongue sometime if you don't do it. I guarantee you that your reverence of the Eucharist will increase for a couple reasons. One is when we kneel, what is that a sign of? When we kneel, it's a position of what? Respect. And we are what? We are, starts with an H. Honor, but again, we're humbling. We're humbling ourselves, right? We're kneeling, we're saying, you are greater, I am lesser. Okay, so when we do that, then we're receiving that in there. And by receiving Jesus directly in the tongue, the priest places Jesus in there. And I did a demo once with my students, and I let them come up and receive a Ritz cracker in their hand and take it back to their seat. I said, now eat the Ritz cracker. They ate the Ritz cracker, and then I said, look at your hands and what's on it. And there were crumbs, and there was little bits of salt and things like that. So there were little particles of the Ritz cracker in their hand. Okay? That's what happens with the Eucharist, too. There's particles of the Eucharist. Even if they're microscopic, they're still in your hand. And so by the priest placing it on your tongue, there's no chance of any part of Jesus falling on the ground, being left on your hand, any of that kind of stuff. So again, I'm not saying good and evil. I'm saying good and better. Try receiving the Eucharist, kneeling it on the tongue, and see if your reverence for the Eucharist increases over time. I would be willing to put money on it that it does. Okay, and that came from me being a 7-year-old and a priest saying that one sentence. I still pray for that priest. I don't know what the priest's name was. Whenever I pray for him, I call him Father First Communion, because I know he can't possibly be alive anymore. Well, he could be if he's like 100, right? But I pray for him because he helped instill in me that awe of the Eucharist, and that's huge.